The first question to you after you have received the book is just what was your first impression, you know, without at all still reading and kind of getting more deeper into the book, but when you just received it and had a first glance into it, um, what was your thoughts? What kind of what was the first things that you really liked, and what maybe some things that you saw problematic, or and it's not even obligatory problematic towards our project, but altogether towards these kind of books. So yeah, first impressions, pluses, minuses, like warm up question.
Well, immediately when I opened the parcel, or it was an envelope, I don't remember, I was struck by how beautiful the book is. You know, it's I like the size, the paper, and that it's soft. Indrek was just showing the book, but I also have it on my table, but with the cover. So it's very pleasant to hold, and when you open it, the first impression is that it can really help you to plunge into this visual feast of the photographs. I think because you did what people now less often do, at least in Lithuania. The fashion of designing books is to leave white edges, and you have filled the book, you know, entirely, the pages entirely. And yeah, our designers seem to think that every photograph has to have like its separate white space, like in a gallery, which is okay. It's also an attitude towards book design. But I must admit, I kind of miss this approach which Lithuanians used in the past to fill the whole page. And that's what you did. Not always. Some photographs do have space around them, and it's also great, you know, to have this variety. But yeah, the first impression was when I opened it, it was, you know, like, wow, I can get into it. And also comparing to the impressions of the exhibition. In the exhibition, you did this design so that people had to go very close to the photographs. So they were tiny, and there were boxes and mirrors and something that was kind of in the way of seeing the photographs. And I understood it as a strategy, maybe to show how it is difficult to access those images in the past, which also mentioned in the book and also in the exhibition, that lots of things were lost and destroyed and lots of things had to be reconstructed. So the viewer of the exhibition had to be invited to do that in a way. That's how I felt in that darkness, discovering those tiny gems of photographs. And the book, you know, opens it up. It's suddenly a feast of these images, which you can experience as if with more senses than just with vision. So there are no obstacles in it. And yes, and the final pages, which are very conveniently in pink. I mean, the change of color is good because it's easier to find them. And pink is, of course, symbolical color in this subject of women's photography, where you provide all the available information on the images, and it's very easy to find those places, consult, you know, look for the information. While you don't clutter with it, the album, the space where all those images are presented in the best way possible. I also like the quality of the printing and of the photographs. So lots of praise to you. Texts as well, they are very concise and informative. You don't have much of analysis here. Yeah, I noticed that you emphasize the word truth and that we cannot present simply the truth, that everybody has to kind of construct their own truth. And as the viewer of the exhibition and also as a reader of this book, I feel that, yeah, you leave me this space to construct my own narrative of this history of photography of two countries, and my understanding of its truth, like this. So,
Yeah, the all the visuals and the design and the way how the images were, how the decisions were made, how to show the images, and actually all the reworking, cleaning, and rephotographing the images, and all that was done by designer Alexei Murashko, who is originally Belarusian, but living already for quite some time in Latvia, and is very celebrated designer. But he has a lot of other great great books that have been both have gotten the prizes, and some are just celebrated without any kind of medals attached to it.
We just got lucky with our design.
Yeah, but I was very honored that he agreed, because I feel that he as a designer, for him, especially with these kind of more art related projects, which he understands are not the most budget friendly projects, that for him it's important that the topic is interesting and valuable to him. So in this sense, it's even the double honor that it's not like that there's some kind of sum that we can pay to him, but and then he agrees, but that it's the topic, or it's that the project itself speaks to him, and that's why he wants to. That's why he agreed to collaborate with us. But yeah, about the text, we decided. And not to push too much, to kind of keep it simple and informative, and just to introduce the journey, introduce the concept, introduce the artists, but hopefully this will be something for the future, because there's still a lot of research that has to be done, where this analytical part will be much more present than it's now. That's why we also, I think, did not shy away from writing very much from the curator's perspective, instead of hard edge researcher perspective or something like that. Being very honest where we stand at the moment with this particular project, and also we never shied away that this is actually very much an art project. That it, of course, it is also a research project, and in a way it was a historical exhibition, but it was more art than history exhibition, and because, as you saw, and as you yourself now tried to analyze what you saw in the exhibition, and how you think you should have looked at the things, and why, that it's very conceptualized, and actually that this topic and these authors are in a way also a catalyst to talk about how we perceive the history, how we perceive the artists, the truth, the canon. I have never thought so much about the canon as much as during doing this project, about how wrong approach is to do some canons or something like that. That the history and who is good and who is not good, and why where we should write or talk about one person and not about other is very complex and not so simple, that there is some kind of God-given geniuses out there, and the rest are kind of not important or something like that, because the question is what is interesting for you, or what for you is this great thing. So but yeah, in the design also there is this moments that I like that Murashko did, was that he also sometimes used, instead of the white background, the black background, especially with the flower image negatives, those glass negatives, and some other things to kind of enhance the feeling. And in the end, this index that we made, where we very detailed give the information about the image, this is homage and kind of present to all the future art historians, because what I have, and it kind of even felt more than this curatorial text for me to have this part very well done, because, the approaches and the information and that can change, and attitudes can change and something like that. But what will stay is the material itself and information about that material. And this is something that I don't know why, except if it's really serious big monographies or encyclopedias or something like that, that many times this is the thing that is skipped in the books, that maybe it's mentioned in general that it comes from that and that and that institutions, that and that private collections, but not saying specifically where, what, how, why, And it's very hard afterwards also for me as a researcher, or if somebody also artists, they are very engaged into art projects, so into research projects, so they also would, maybe some of them would be interested to go and find those works or that material. So it's just it just, kind of we give them already these tools, this information, and this access to this material that I don't understand and have never understand why it has been chosen many times not to be present in the books like these.
I really liked how you presented each photographer through a series, if you could. Some photographers probably didn't do any series, so they are presented as girls who photographed whatever similar photographers photographed in any country. I can recognize the same types, the same situations as in provincial photography, or even in the photography in the city in Lithuania. So we could compare and find the same subjects. So those photographs like by Plavina or Mergupė, they don't contradict what I would expect. But when you present the photographers through a series like Rent, through towers, lighthouses, towers, I find it very interesting. It seems like this typological photography predates Becker's. It's not like nobody did it before and that Rent was the first in the world. I don't want to say that. But when you look at images like this, you see a personality behind them, somebody who has a special interest, has a special attitude, and this is reflected in her photographs. And you can imagine that there were lots of people with specific interests, which were expressed in their photographs, but then Becker's only conceptualized it, turned into a school. And that school then continued, became something serious, which photographers take up and use it as a method. But somehow, even without this conceptualization, the method emerges, but it's not the most important thing when I look at those towers. For me, it's the most interesting thing is this personality who travels around, this woman who looks at towers, which is like typically a male subject. If we look at gender studies, it's something different. And of course, the images themselves, they show a very interesting variety of the design of towers, which is interesting in a different way again. Or, for example, a completely different story, Lydia Tarem, where you present her whole photography through the images in the same mirror. reflections in the same mirror. It's, I think, a wonderful way to present a photographer, her whole life story, which you tell also in words, but the images tell it as well. What I want to say through this is that I really like the way that you decided to show these photographers by selecting something small, probably very small, from their archives. While, you know, as a researcher myself, I know how difficult it is, because when you get into the subject, you see lots of images which you would like to show, and then it turns out in the end that you create two large books, and probably they don't even show those photographers. How did you choose? What was the process? How did you decide to present them in such a way?
I was even at some points worried that some photography historians might try to approach the exhibition and now also the book as a history book, which it is not. As you say, there is no analysis in it, and most partly also because we have not had chance to do it. But otherwise also that the exhibition and the book now does the same. It's a very artistic approach. So when you talk about Helena Fent's lighthouses, then, you know, to be honest, the truth might be also that she just had let's say, a very mean interpretation for the lighthouses could be easily that she had a very limited fantasy when it came to making postcards. You know, I mean, it's very mean to say, but it actually is totally possible, because that's another beauty. We don't know nothing about her.
No, but Indrek, what you have constantly said also, that when looking at other of her images, she was obsessed with towers. So she liked, you know, the church tower, or there has to be always this tower. So it's going through, you know, many of her images. So there is something about those towers.
No, but that's what I mean. That it's obvious that when she makes a landscape,
I think there is.
When she makes a landscape composition, then she just needs to have the church or the chimney, or you can imagine she went to Tallinn Old Town. Like, I mean, only towers. And the lighthouses were a popular topic also when you live on the islands and so on. But there were also other topics. She liked also fences, and she liked roads, and she liked traces. And I don't know.
Which sounds like this German conceptualist
photography. Let's say, actually, we could have. We were even, when I was presenting to Šelda first the material, then we even had this discussion which kind of serious should we take from her. So actually, I like very much your interpretation that we had a very early conceptualist among us. And so we had freedom to put those series together. And then, for example, when we talk about Lydia Tarem, then one of the reasons why we went, like she had those selfies in the mirror, why we went for that was also that so the material wouldn't get boring, to be honest. Again, when we take it into this art exhibition context, then, you know, another 5 photos of studio, you know, we have Kreuzberg already, you know,
yes.
And Lydia Tarem as well was doing actually excellent studio photos. And again, I was actually afraid of being attacked by the photography historians, like that I'm sort of diminishing her, you know, her creation when I just show her with some blurry selfies in a mirror. But then again, the story was so nice, so it was so touching that she photographs herself throughout the mirrors, and again, a little bit similar as with Fent, there would have been actually different stories to tell. Like her relationship to her husband could have been also showed totally differently, and that was very much, at first I was very much torn towards showing her through the, you know, the male gaze, so female gaze then, because there are a lot of photos of her husband like on the beach or whatever. We could have also had a different look of her.
But the mirror also, of course, kind of in its own way kind of resembled this predecessor or ancestor of selfies. So because we were talking a lot while making the exhibition that we want it to very much to be about the present time. So that it's not kind of, we're not trying to kind of make this objective kind of look into the history, but that it strongly connects with the time in which we are living. So kind of, I think at least one of the reasons why we chose those mirror images, besides that it's a very personal story and it's a self-portrait and self-portrait actually of her family, and in the end a very tragic and in a way portrait of her already as an old lady, being alone, and for the first time getting back to the place where she was living before the Second World War, was that it kind of resembles also this urge to photograph yourself, but then
I would say Alexei Murashko put it after the book was out, and then for me he managed to verbalize it in a very beautiful way, that how to say, that the book gives faces to the photographers, that they became, the series became like portraits, or they became characters, which I kind of, it was a very beautiful way for me to say, for him to describe what we did. I was very pleased that
it's like nowadays it's very popular to also make this for for the bigger audiences. There's little fairy tales about important women in history or something like that. So it's a little bit of that, kind of, except we're not writing fairy tales, but there is those little cute stories.
But we had Rapunzel.
But that's why we also played with the titles and those little descriptions about them, that we had the Rapunzel, how it's in English, and salon lady and girl on the bicycle, and kind of these kind of...
Yeah, I like that as well, because these small titles, they also indicate the way it's possible to think about these women, because I must admit, albums of photography that was made before the middle of the 20th century, they often tend to become quite boring, because in albums that present not the greatest achievements of art photography, but of those, let's say, craftsmen photographers, craftswomen photographers, they tend to be the same everywhere. And we have such albums in Lithuania as well. I have participated in making one with the same Kupiškis museum that has Šleivytė, but I have also participated. So I had seen lots and lots of such images. And if you just put everything just to show examples, you would have the same kind of album. So the way you selected those different stories, those different fairy tales, actually helps to get into the subject, and what is most important, to make it interesting. It raises questions. You see this little story with a mirror. It's like a short poem. And as you have just told, there are plenty of subjects to choose from in this photographer's archive. And you could have done that. You could have shown examples of this and that, and it would be interesting as well. But when you concentrate it like this, and I was thinking about a word like poem. A poem, short poem about life, and it becomes very, very deep when you concentrate it like that, and probably much more significant than it was actually for this photographer, because she just kept snapping probably those images from now and then. Didn't think much about it. And actually that's what happens with photography in our lives. We keep snapping, and then other people make something out of it when they discover the archive. It will happen also with our contemporary photographs, I think, the ones we snap for ourselves. When we talk about art, it's different, because photographers, when they intentionally create art, they, of course, conceptualize, they try to present it in certain ways, and then it becomes like a finished statement. it's more difficult to open it up and kind of create your own stories out of that. Art can be analyzed, and it's another thing, another topic, but the fascinating thing about photographic archives is that it leaves lots of freedom for future researchers, future people who just like to look at photographs and see something. So you saw selfies in Tarem's photographs, and of course everybody would see it. It's possible to see in them also the link between mirrors and women, which is constantly discussed in the context of gender studies, in the context of art, when how women are represented in traditional art. My cat, always the participant of most important discussions, meetings, and so on. Yes, and traditional paintings, but also in photography, in women's photography in particular, like in this canon of the history of photography, world photography, there is this Lady Hawarden who photographed her daughters often looking at the mirror. And these canonical books of history of photography, they emphasize this woman in her private space, looking at the mirror, and there are all these connections with narcissism and what was talked about women who are vain and so on, but also it's a way to see yourself and so on. And of course, when we look at these few selfies that you have presented, we can think of all that, but here it's another layer of history. And this history is disturbing, and of course it reflects our common history of Baltic states when the old way of life was torn apart by occupants, and people's lives were destroyed. And we have lots of stories about that. And this selection of yours makes it memorable. I mean, it's one more story which will stay in my mind because I've seen it, this visual story, and it's different from other stories on the same topic in some subtle, small ways. So it's very nice, I think. And talking about history, for example, when I looked about Kreuzberger's images, of course, she was, I can see she was an important photographer, had her studio. You also informed the reader about this, but of course, all her photographs are really well done, retouched, and as an art historian, I would almost find nothing to say about them because they're also typical of that time, but very good examples. And I remember Paul, who was photographing both in Latvia and in Lithuania, and also he influenced lots of people in Lithuania as well. So I don't know who was first, Kreuzberger or Paul, but it doesn't really matter because it was the time. But what struck me in this, when I was looking through images and looking at the end in the catalog, that you say, and it should obviously be the truth, that lots of celebrities of the time came to her studio to get photographed. But when you look in those pink pages, at least I have found mostly mentions of woman or man. So the names are lost. And those celebrities, they cannot be identified or something, or what happened. It's also about our history because lots of memory is lost, isn't it? So, yeah, what's the case?
No, I think that they definitely can be identified. They just have not been identified yet. And so in the museums, they just are with these titles. But there was a lot of material, a lot of photographies from her where the names and surnames were present of well-known that time writers, film directors, actresses and actors, opera singers, dancers, and etc. They just weren't as exciting images. Most of her things are preserved in the postcards, because those celebrity images, they were mass produced, and she actually produced them in such a way so she could sell them more for cheaper price. So she, in this sense, was a true businesswoman. She was thinking kind of how to get some more money by making them cheaper, and then people would more buy them. And I guess thanks to that, she actually has saved partly her legacy. But it's a very good point from you about that. Yeah, that we are bragging about all those celebrities, but then choose the works that don't show them. So I actually did not thought about that. Let's call it then like that. That there is all those also preserved images, photos made by her of those local celebrities. But these are kind of like from this Platonic kind of view. These are those.
Pure art, isn't it?
It's this prevision. No, how it's in English for this Platon's this first before the the first image.
Plato, like primal image.
Primary image.
Ideas.
So let's call it the primary image.
Well, and art for art's sake then, because in photography it's important to know who is in the image usually. And again, we look at the tradition of writing the history of world photography. They would always talk about this and that photographer who photographed famous people, and of course their portraits will be included in the book. Like Julia Margaret Cameron photographed Herschel, and of course Herschel is in the history of photography books. And Kreutzberger seems to be, like one of those master photographers, a great portrait photographer. And probably history of photography books should include portraits of famous people made by her. But you have chosen now, as I understand, to include this art for art's sake. On the other end of the spectrum seems to me Hilja Reed with her flowers. She's also a professional, as I understand, but she was making postcards. So it is a kind of thing not created as art, at least in that context, but simply for commercial reasons. And I really like that you have included those, silly pictures of flowers. Women are associated with flowers. It's something. I'm not confusing the names. Yeah, it's Reed, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Hilja Reed. Yeah, but in her, I don't know, not defense, but I have to say that she also participated with the compositions in exhibitions.
Oh, did she?
Yeah,
okay.
There's even some exhibition prints preserved and so on. So she actually took them seriously.
I see. So Šleivytė, whom you mentioned in your introduction and whose book we have published, she also photographed lots of flowers and participated in exhibitions with them. So I can see a kind of parallel. But when you present those postcard flowers exclusively, it's just somehow very nice. I don't know. I really like that part. I don't know what to say about it. It's just beautiful. And on the other hand, you can see how a book like this, which treats all kinds of photography like on equal terms. It doesn't matter if it's a documentary on gold washing or art like Kreutzberger's or flowers, postcards. When you put them in this book format and print them in this equally high quality way, they suddenly become very artistic, and somehow you feel that you can start appreciating them Of course, as an art historian, you would start talking about the inclusion of all kinds of visual material into history of photography and blah, blah, blah. But somehow it talks to me about this equality of all kinds of images, and a book, this format, such a format of a book, can help to see value in each kind of photography. So I find it very interesting and also valuable experience as
But
well.
in this context of equality, I have a question to you, because obviously this project starting point and also the way how it was presented, it wasn't shying away from introducing also and dealing with the woman history, and it's in itself it's nothing new, not also very old. The concept came up in this or was invented in the and developed in the 70s in America, and now it kind of seems to have again a momentum at the moment. You know, it developed through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, but it seems that now it kind of, maybe because of political events and shifts and earthquakes happening around the world, it has helped it to have a momentum at the moment. And while I was working on this project and a Riga project, I experienced interesting, totally different kind of reactions to these kind of projects. I had those who were, congratulating me and are also congratulating now, and that it's very important. It's great that we took it up, and we have to talk about these things. And then there were those who were neglecting the project because it is from this perspective, that it is through this woman history perspective, and diminishing it to being fashionable at the moment, as to kind of pushing down, or kind of diminishing the value that we are doing it for the wrong reasons, or that this may be also suggesting that this is not an obligatory or right way how to look at the history, or that it's too manipulative. I don't know. Different views have different, and then of course there is also kind of the third who have very strong idea about that how much and how strongly it all has to be pushed, that are again critical towards us to being too mild. That we should have pushed
Too
it.
mild?
Yeah, that we should have pushed it more. So those who, who want it to be even more feministic, that it would be more spoken out than we did, So what is all your thoughts, also just in general, but also in the context of photography, of this woman history momentum we have at the moment?
Yes, I feel that this momentum is going on, and I'm also involved in it as well, because we not mentioning the book about Šleivytė, which started, years ago. We started being interested in her work, and it's kind of the end of this project, but also not the end. We are thinking about an exhibition in the future. But also we are writing with my colleagues a book, a dictionary-like book of women artists of Lithuania. So this is going on. And a few years ago, there was an international conference organized by people from British universities, actually from London, but in Vilnius, to kind of enhance this question of women photographers. It was called Fast Forward, Lithuanian edition, and it's focusing on women photographers, and lots of people from all over the world came, and they organized this conference in Lithuania in order to encourage this talk and research into women photographers in the Baltic states specifically. We had a hard time finding people from Latvia and Estonia to invite, but we found them, and so this conference was complete. But somehow I think this conference also encouraged interest in women's photography, or was part of the momentum, I don't know. But yeah, I could say that starting from, let's say, middle of last decade and into now, this topic is kind of hot. And if you are not fast enough, other people will do it. I feel this, especially with this women artists book. We are pressed to do it quicker because others will do it. It's trending now. And you mentioned certain political events, and maybe this is connected. I don't know, maybe not. But yeah, somebody has mentioned in the wide world that Trump's misogynism has created the Me Too movement. So it's possible that all kinds of backlashes in our politics have also had this opposite effect of, you should look for women photographers, you should rewrite histories, and so on. Like in Lithuania, just before the current elections, which were criticized by two Estonian ministers, but in a very funny way. You must see what our comics have done with this. But yes, before these elections, we had a government which for some time didn't have any women in the highest positions, and afterwards they included one woman just to calm things down. But we did feel in Lithuania that we have this kind of going back to this patriarchalism, and when you see the situation, you start thinking, and probably because of that, the push became stronger towards introducing the tenets of feminism into life, and also, of course, in art. And of course, it's the question of art history. You mentioned before, and you expressed it now, that there is this canon of art history. And it's difficult to avoid the canon because, of course, we are talking there about the best artists. They are the best. How can you start talking about some marginal women artists before talking about the best artists when you teach art history, for example, or when you write art history books, or when you create an exhibition, this permanent exposition of the history of local art in National Gallery, without mostly showing those famous, most important canonical artists who are usually men, and showing women instead. We had this problem in Lithuania as curators, Laima Šleivytė, Lolita Jablonskienė, Jolanta Marcišauskytė, Jurašenė, and me. We were doing this permanent exhibition, and we had a great problem with that, and we ended up with much fewer women artists than we would have wanted to. And I always had this feeling that this canon of art history is conspiring against such efforts. So what I'm leading to is, however, we criticize these women-only books, women-only exhibitions, and especially women artists like to criticize that because they want to be among the greatest artists, not known as women artists simply. You know what I mean? It's everywhere like that, and it's completely understandable. Every artist wants to be known for the quality of their work and not for their gender. And actually, the fact that we still need to stress that shows that there is this disbalance in gender relationships. And so Also, women artists criticize such exhibitions like Silver Girls, such books like Silver Girls, and other exhibitions and books, but they normally don't refuse to participate in them because it's a showcase. It's a showcase for these women artists, and I think we need to do that, because otherwise, that's the reason I was telling about my experience. The canon conspires against showing those women because they are not so famous. And why are they not so famous? Because before, historians were not talking about them, before they were not finding their work interesting, they were not finding their work, they were forgetting their work, and they were probably marginal in those societies and organizations which were important for art. And in Lithuania, even it was the case in interwar period that women were not accepted into the artists' society, so they created their own organization. It was not the case in photography, probably because there were so few women photographers. Nobody saw a threat in them. Somehow they participated in the same events. Like I find you mentioned in this book as well, that it was the case in Latvia and Estonia. But in this fine art sphere, which was, of course, much more important, women were excluded. And we could find lots of situations like that. We could analyze like those good old art historians like Linda Nochlin and find facts, how women were discriminated in this way or other way, lots of cases. So, of course, knowing such situations actually makes it even more amazing that some women artists and photographers did manage to have such positions like Kreitzberger, for example. You start admiring them for their strength. Or Anna Cook, who photographed those gold washing processes, documented and even probably wanted to create a book. You see them as heroes who went against the grain and managed to do things which were not forbidden to them, but where they were seen as somebody who is who shouldn't be here. Simply, we were always told you must be twice as good as the men who in those positions in order to take the same position. I was raised with this idea. I know it is true from life experience. So, of course, these women in older times, they had even more obstacles to achieve what they wanted to achieve. And it's admirable. And concerning the other objection that you didn't go more into this feminist approach, I reject that. To me, such feminist approaches in this day, I'm not talking about the 70s, then they needed to formulate the approach itself, the methods, how to analyze this, how to raise those women artists, how to question the canon, how to question the traditional ways of representation. They had to devise those methods, use them, and discover all these forgotten and lost women artists, if we talk just about art. And nowadays, it would be just the repetition of the same. And whenever people start doing it very thoroughly, like following the method, I noticed that I'm getting bored because I know the story already and I want different stories simply. So what you have done, you have brought these women photographers out and you have presented them as unique personalities, unique artists, and interesting people. I think this is very valuable and maybe much more valuable than if you just showed whether they whether somebody was a little bit feminist or not, and how they participated in women's movement or not. Of course, such an approach is possible, and it would be probably also interesting in terms of history, but in terms of photography, I find this version also very interesting, the way you showed it, and I don't see why it should be otherwise. I also think that your decision to include those 3 contemporary artists is a kind of very nice hidden way to say something to viewers and to readers about the way that this photographic archive by women, what's its situation. I didn't realize it that much when I was at the exhibition because we were busy with the symposium and my thoughts were elsewhere. But a book allows you to read, look at it in a peaceful way, analyze, and I have to consult my notes. But I have written down what's most important about each of the artists. And now I see that, okay, when you show tone art, you show what is lost. And of course, it's like a way to say that lots of things that are in this book, they are just the peak of an iceberg of what is lost.
Yeah.
And also that lots of women photographers who are not in this book might be lost. And then when you show the Bois Bull, the main idea seems to be, what makes things visible. And, we have to think a lot about what makes certain photographers visible. Their fame when they worked in their studios, or what historians wrote about them, or whether they participated in the exhibitions, or if they published a book, or if people talked about them simply in the media, what makes them visible. And actually, since you don't analyze this in this book, it's like a question to the reader. You leave it open also to think what made these women visible or invisible in this history, and what makes them visible now when you have had this project. So it's something to think about. And of course, Sami van Ingen was about the only man in the exhibition, as you mentioned it. He talks about reconstructing and manipulating those found fragments of history of this archive, which has lots of gaps where lots of things have been lost, of how present historians and curators can recreate, not only by reconstructing this archive, but like creating new stories out of it and making them relevant to contemporary viewers. And I find that you have done it with this book. You made them relevant.